This is Twit.
It's exciting to be looking at hardware right now. In part because we're curious to see what NVIDIA announces today, in part because Mobile World Congress is coming, in part because 5G continues to find new and exciting ways to drive me completely insane. But mostly because we are constantly on the search for an improved audio experience. We have
Indeed.
a disease, Sebastian and I. Actually, I ran out. I'm so glad I got that box as it was set on the porch because it has a set of KEF LSX speakers in it.
Oh, nice.
Powered speakers. And we literally just had about an inch of rain fall in about 45 minutes, blowing at a 45-degree angle. So I'm happy to say that the box is safe. You reviewed something that most people haven't thought about in a long time. You got a PCI Express sound card in for review from the crew over at EVGA.
In fact, it's in my hand right here. If the camera will focus on it, I'm actually on camera. And this is with the shroud. This is with the heatsink removed. This is just the bare card. I had taken it apart to take pictures of it and look at all the components. But it's right off the bat, I will say, this is expensive. I mean, it's on par with Asus has the Essence STX2 sound card, which is around a $250 card. $259, I think, is the MSRP. This is a $249 MSRP, so around the same. And this is all about two-channel audio. So
it's priced like a premium audio, an entry-level premium audiophile DAC, or not a stupid overpriced audiophile DAC. I'm judging there because
And I think companies like is it pronounced FIO or FIO? I never know.
I usually say FIO, and I'm pretty sure that's wrong.
Okay, well, but that company, and companies like, and this is actually their name, of course. This is Shit Audio. They make products that are in that sort of $100 range that kind of defy audiophile conventions and say, like, this is an outstanding product for what it is, and you don't have to overpay, and you can buy a stack with a DAC and a headphone amplifier for $200.
I throw JDS Labs in that. I know those guys pretty well.
And I've listened to. You've heard their stuff, right? You've heard some of their smaller DACs and headphone amplifiers and stuff.
Yeah,
and they've been getting better generation to generation. But yeah, when you're spending around $200, you can certainly do something external that's going to sound very good. There are a few interesting points about this, I think, and I'm sure you've had a chance to look over the specs. We've been talking about this since they announced it at CES. But in addition to supporting all the way up to like the highest bit rate and sample rate of linear PCM audio, 32384, this also has native DSD support, multi-rate DSD, and it has very, very good components on the board. Like, it's been very thoughtfully designed, very well constructed, a very good line output. Like, the signal quality is excellent, very, very quiet, excellent signal to noise ratio, great dynamic range, all of those numbers that it hits on paper. And then when you actually demo this in person, like, I was running this through a pair of, modest, so-called audiophile style headphones. I have a pair of Audio-Technica ADH700Xs here, and they're okay. And they're only 38 ohms. They weren't really a challenge for the headphone amplifier on this thing. You could certainly drive much higher end headphones. I decided to put it to the test with a small stereo system, so I put together integrated amplifier, grabbed a pair of speakers, and started listening to music straight from the RCA line output on this right into the back of the amplifier. And it sounded better than most of the full-size components that I have owned. It's just phenomenally good, wide, clear two-channel audio coming out of this thing. And it was just, it didn't matter how loud I turned it up when I was listening with headphones. It was just like absolutely silent. I could not get this thing to, there was no distortion. So they've done a really good job. Like when you actually look at the components that make up this sound card, it makes sense. Like they went all out with very high-end capacitors and resistors, and the op amps, which are swappable, are of good quality. I mean, they're absolutely, you can put in better ones, which is why they're in sockets. But right out of the box, this thing sounds phenomenal. And even though it is PCI Express, it was interesting. It is internally just a USB device. It has a bridge chip to connect to PCI Express, but internally, it is using one of those XMOS, those very popular like multiprocessors for the DSP. It gets its power via a SATA power input on the back of the card. So it's running not off of your motherboard, but off of your power supply directly, and it's got some pretty significant power. I think this thing puts up close to, it's either 7 or 8 watts it can put out. So significantly higher than what you'd get from one of those smaller like digital audio players, that sort of thing. And I've personally, for the last few years, used a little digital audio player as my like portable DAC and headphone amp off of my PC. And this is just like a different level of performance. Very, very impressive 2-channel sound. It just comes down to, are you interested in high quality 2-channel audio? Does like this price point from a company that's synonymous with like gaming, like motherboards, high performance graphics cards, they got into cases, they sell at least one laptop. So, for them to come out with a product that really sits squarely in the audiophile side of things is fascinating. But I wonder how many people looking at this will see the price tag and just immediately dismiss it because it doesn't have like multi-channel surround and all of those things that you would associate with gaming.
I mean, I'd be really curious if the audio reviewers pick it up, if some of the audio magazines do it. I remember digital audio didn't really arrive until Stereophile put like an Asus Zonar card, I think it was, on the front. And there was one before that I can't think of the name of. But there was in the space of a couple of years, they went from like vinyl till death to all of a sudden there were, audio cards, physical audio cards on the front of the magazine. And that was a big sign that, this digital thing wasn't going away anytime soon. But, compared to, if some of the objective measurement sites get a hold of this and it tests well, I mean, part of me is like, this sounds fascinating. And part of me is like, well, I already have a whole bunch of outboard USB based or SPDIF based gear that is delivering most of these features. But there's a lot of people out there who are looking for like full DSD playback and some of the more obscure stuff, or want to build a sort of audio workstation. Although it's kind of funny, a lot of the people who are willing to spend the money on that have also convinced themselves that this, anything inside the case can't possibly be shielded well enough to avoid the influence of EMI or other things or RF issues. But I'm curious. It sounds like it's nice when something claims to be something good and it actually lives up to its expectations. I particularly like AKM DACs. On one level, I understand that all DACs should sound the same, and on the other level, I think some DACs do a little bit better job than others. And I have at least 2 devices in my house right now with AKM DACs inside of them. I think they're pretty impressive. I also have some stuff with like some ancient Wolfson and Cirrus Logic DACs that sounds pretty impressive too. So I'm just happy it's
it's not just the components, it's obviously implementation.
Right.
And one of the things that was so frustrating to me, I bought a external creative sound card primarily because I was going to be doing some like ripping from vinyl, make high resolution copies of some of my analog records. And internally, the design of that X-Fi like HD card had dual oscillators, like they were present on the board, but they were not enabled in software. So everything was being resampled to 48. And so none of the native like 44.1 variants, like 88.2, which is a lot of the DSD masters that have been converted to LPCM or 88.2, 24-bit, it would have to resample those. And if you were playing like straight native, like I use Fubar 2000 or JRiver on any of my Windows systems. And if you have those configured with the Windows Audio Session Manager API for like a direct output, they just don't work if your device is not natively supporting the format that is being pushed out to it. So I was very pleased to see that this has two oscillators, so it handles both frequencies natively. It has a very high quality analog to digital converter as well, also from AKM. But interestingly, I found a Cirrus Logic ADC on the board as well. It turns out that one is dedicated to just the microphone input. So your line input is an AKM chip that can record natively up to the same 32-bit, 384 kilohertz that the output can, which is the first time I've seen that from a card like this. I've previously been limited to 24-bit, 96 kilohertz recording from a sound card. Some of them might go up to 192, but possibly just through like, interpolation. But very impressive components throughout, though. When you study the website has images like the close-ups of all the different component choices that they've made and the capacitors and that sort of thing. But ultimately, that means nothing unless it sounds good, and this does. But as far as objective measurements go, it was interesting at the suite at CES. We were seeing audio precision measurements, which were fantastic and rivaled dedicated gear. I have not seen that like on the site. I think it's a different audience. I would love it if Stereophile did get this though, and then John Atkinson could do his thing. Yeah. And then we see
Audio Science Review. They're doing a ton of benchmarks these days.
Yes. Yeah. And then somebody just showing you those independent results to validate the performance. And I think this one would actually stand up quite well against gear. And when you think about it in audiophile land, $250 is nothing. It's to the point where there are people who would hear the price tag and say next, because they're not interested in something so inexpensive. But for the average consumer, this is very expensive for a sound card when every motherboard has audio, and they, certainly there is room to question like the validity of a dedicated solution when motherboard audio has gotten better, et cetera, et cetera. But it really does take a critical ear. I don't actually think that the difference here between motherboard audio and this card is subtle at all. You will immediately hear a difference coming from most motherboard audio, primarily just with how clear and wide the sound is, because the channel separation from this is fantastic. But
also, I mean, it's also one of the things, if you don't have Spotify Premium, if you aren't running Tidal, if you haven't ripped your CDs to FLAC, if you aren't playing CDs, if you have a free streaming service, there's a pretty good chance that you don't have a lot of the musical information there that's going to come through your good headphones or your good stereo speakers and deliver the the performance the hardware is capable of.
Yeah, and I will add just quickly, the other issue with adoption of a product like this, besides just the price tag, is that it does require a commitment on the part of the consumer to have high quality equipment to play it back on, whether that's a stereo and speakers, like a receiver or an amplifier, or if that means a dedicated pair of really high quality headphones. And there are some great headphones out there for under $100, but then again, like that $100 to $300 range of like entry level audiophile headphones, that is also adding to the cost of this. So if it makes sense for somebody who's already an enthusiast, who already has nice headphones and wants to bring that to their PC, it makes less sense for the average consumer. Like you said, if they're listening to streaming music, like there's not a whole lot of channel separation or dynamic range to most music that's streaming over one of those services anyhow. So